He's a strange old soldier, a man who never really returned from the battlefield. My wife spoke every word slowly and clearly into the microphone, making sure everyone inside the courtroom could hear her. For 31 years, I wasn't living beside a husband, she said. I was living with a nightmare. A small laugh came from the back of the courtroom. Then another one followed. 31 years of marriage, ending with people laughing at a man who had spent his younger years putting himself between danger and other people so they could survive. My wife refused to meet my eyes. Her lawyer sat there with a small, satisfied smile on his face. For almost an hour, he had described me as an angry old man, someone who had lost control, someone mentally broken, someone who deserved nothing after the divorce. It felt like everything had already been decided. Then I looked toward the judge. At that exact moment, he was raising his coffee cup to take a drink. I looked at him calmly and asked, "Judge Apprentice, do you still remember me?" The cup stopped halfway to his mouth. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the cup slipped from his hand. The entire courtroom became completely silent. The judge's face turned pale. He stood up from his chair like he had just seen someone who was supposed to have disappeared years ago. "My God," he whispered, "is that really you?" But that was only the beginning. The thing that shocked everyone in that courtroom wasn't simply that the judge knew who I was. The real surprise was that a secret buried for decades was about to come into the light. My name is Harlan Meade. I am 69 years old, and for 25 years, I served as an Army combat medic. That means I spent the strongest years of my life kneeling in mud, blood, and dirt, trying to keep other men alive when everything around us was trying to take them away. I live just outside Clarksville, Tennessee, close enough to Fort Campbell that some nights you can hear helicopters moving through the sky. And I will tell you something, that sound has always brought me comfort instead of fear, because those sounds remind me of a time when I knew exactly who I was and what my purpose was. There is something they teach you very early in my line of work. It took me most of my life to understand that the lesson was not only meant for a battlefield. You stop the bleeding you can see. That is the entire rule. You find the wound that is threatening someone's life right now. You put your hands on it. You press down. You fight to keep that person alive. Everything else, every other injury and every other pain, you carry with you and promise yourself you will deal with it later. The problem is, later doesn't always arrive. And some wounds never bleed where anyone can see them. You can save every person in your unit and still have no idea how to heal the quiet damage inside your own home. Remember that, because that is the real story. Let me take you back to that courtroom, back to the exact moment when that coffee cup stopped moving. For a few seconds, Judge Apprentice stared at me as if he couldn't trust his own eyes. Then all the color disappeared from his face. He pushed himself out of that chair so quickly it rolled backward and struck the wall. "Oh, my lord," he said softly. "Harlan Meade." Suddenly, that small courtroom felt much bigger. My wife's attorney, a polished and expensive man named Wendell Fisk, looked from the judge back to me. And for the first time that day, I saw fear appear on his face. For 40 minutes, he had been building a story about me, a story where I was the bitter, damaged old man who had spent decades shutting his wife out. He had enjoyed every second of it, but now his confidence was gone. His tie suddenly seemed too tight around his neck, and Glenda, my wife of 31 years, sitting there in the pale gray blouse I had bought her 3 anniversaries earlier, finally looked uncertain. "Everyone will take a 15-minute recess," Judge Apprentice said. His voice was not as steady as before. I stayed in my chair with my hands folded together, feeling every single one of my 69 years resting heavily inside my bones. That was the moment my wife understood something. She did not truly know the man she had been married to. If you have ever been turned into a single ugly word in front of a room full of strangers, then you understand something about how painful it can be. Broken. I thought about that word. I carried it around in my mind. And the strange thing was, it didn't hurt as much as people might expect. Because deep down, I knew Glenda was not really angry at me. She was angry because life had not become the picture she created in her mind. A lot of people our age carry that same quiet disappointment. Some marriages survive it, others don't. If you have ever loved someone for decades and watched them slowly become someone who seems disappointed just by looking at you, then you know it rarely happens in one huge moment. It happens through thousands of tiny silences. A smile that once felt warm but slowly disappears. A hand that once reached for yours but no longer does. A conversation that becomes shorter every day. You don't lose a marriage all at once. You lose it slowly, the same way a person loses hearing. So gradually that one day you suddenly realize how silent everything around you has become. Let me explain how we reached that courtroom. I grew up in a small Tennessee town where almost every family had someone who wore a uniform. My father served in Korea. My older brother Wade was killed overseas in 1969 when I was only 13 years old, and I believe that was the day I stopped being a child. By the time I finished high school, joining the Army did not feel like a decision. It felt like something already written for me, like the weather. Like gravity, I chose to become a medic because I had already watched too many people leave home and never return. I wanted to be the person who helped a few more of them make it back. I met Glenda in 1990 at a church fish fry in Hopkinsville. She laughed at one of the worst jokes I had ever made about my burnt hush puppies, and I remember thinking I had never seen a smile that felt so genuine. Back then, she didn't care that I drove an old truck with rust around the wheel wells. She didn't care that my dress uniform had probably been worn longer than some of the young soldiers serving under me. She once told me that being around me made her feel safe, and for many years we were happy. Not the kind of happiness you see in movies. The real kind. The kind built from ordinary days, house payments, Friday night dinners, folding laundry while the television played in the background, raising our son Travis in a small brick house outside town. But people change so slowly that sometimes you don't notice it happening. It is like watching the shoreline move. You look away, and when you look back, everything is different. After I retired, things became harder for me. The worst part was that I had no idea how to explain it. The nightmares became stronger. Crowded places made my chest tighten. Some mornings, I would sit inside my truck outside the hardware store for 20 minutes just trying to convince myself to walk through the doors. Glenda thought I was becoming distant. The truth was different. I was exhausted. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix. I was tired somewhere deeper. But men from my generation were raised differently. Men like me were taught to keep moving, keep quiet, and never show weakness. We were never taught the words for what was happening inside us. So I stayed silent. And I will tell you something I learned too late. Silence can destroy a marriage just as surely as cruelty can. It just happens more slowly. But the damage is just as real. Teachers, old veterans, and ordinary people who were just trying to stand back up after hard times came to me and told me they had finally seen something they never noticed before. They said they saw an old medic who had spent most of his life believing that nobody really saw him anymore. They saw a man who had spent years helping others, carrying pain quietly, and standing strong even when nobody asked how he was doing. And when I heard those words, I looked over at Glenda. Her eyes filled up again. But this time, something was different. There was no guilt hiding there. There was no shame. There was something deeper. Something that looked a lot like understanding. Like she was finally seeing the person standing in front of her instead of only seeing the role he had played for so many years. If you've ever watched someone finally understand another person after years of missing the signs, then you know how powerful that moment can be. It carries sadness because so much time has passed, but it also carries hope because sometimes understanding arrives before it is truly too late. And that kind of moment stays with you forever. That night made me think about all the silent people living around us, the ones who keep families together, the ones who show up every day without asking for anything back, the ones who carry responsibilities, memories, and struggles that nobody else knows about. They are everywhere. They are our neighbors, our friends, our parents, our spouses, and sometimes even the person looking back at us in the mirror. And the hardest part is that these people are often the easiest to overlook. Not because they don't matter, but because they make everything look so normal. They make carrying heavy things seem easy. They smile when they are tired. They say, "I'm fine," when they are hurting. They keep moving because somewhere along the way, they learned that stopping was not an option. That evening, Glenda came over to my small house near the water. She was holding a little wooden box against her chest. She stood there quietly for a moment before handing it to me. "Found this while cleaning out the attic," she said softly. I opened the box, and inside was my folded retirement flag. It had been kept safe all these years, carefully placed away, untouched, like someone had protected a piece of my life even when I felt forgotten. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just stood there looking at that flag, remembering everything that had happened and everything that had been left unsaid. Then Glenda finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but every word carried weight. "I think these are the words we both needed to hear a long time ago," she said. "I'm sorry I stopped seeing you for who you really were." I looked at her, and after a moment I answered, "And I'm sorry I stopped letting you see me." Because the truth was, we had both lost something. She had stopped looking closely enough to notice the pain I carried. But I had also built walls so high that even the person who loved me couldn't find a way through them. The sun was dropping lower over the water that evening. The sky turned orange and gold, and that warm light covered the porch where we stood. It was one of those quiet moments where nobody needs to say much because everything important is already understood. Together, we unfolded that old flag. Then we showed Ruby how to fold it properly into a perfect triangle, the same way my father had taught me many years before. The same tradition passed down from one generation to another, 3 generations standing together at sunset, quiet, peaceful, healing, and standing there I thought maybe that was enough. Maybe after everything I had lost, everything I had carried, and everything I had kept hidden, that moment was more than I ever thought a man like me deserved. That night taught me something I wish I had understood much earlier in life. You can spend decades being the person everyone depends on. You can spend your whole life stopping other people's bleeding, fixing their problems, and carrying their burdens. You can be the one everyone calls when things fall apart. And still, somehow, you can forget how to care for the hurt that is growing quietly inside your own heart. You can become so good at saving others that you forget you also need saving sometimes. I spent my life as a medic. I knew how to recognize injuries. I knew how to treat wounds. I knew how to stay calm when someone else was afraid. But I didn't know how to admit when I was the one who needed help. And that is the danger of silence. Silence does not always break things loudly. Sometimes it breaks them slowly. It enters a home little by little. It creates distance between people who once knew each other's hearts. It creates empty spaces where conversations used to be. A marriage does not always fall apart because of anger or betrayal. Sometimes it fades because 2 people stop reaching for each other. Sometimes it breaks because one person hides their pain and the other person stops looking for it. Silence can damage love just as deeply as harsh words can. The difference is that silence works quietly. It makes you believe everything is fine until one day you realize something important has been missing for years. And the people who are the strongest in the eyes of the world are often the ones who need someone to look closer. The quiet ones. The ones who never complain. The ones who always say, "Don't worry about me." The ones who spend their lives making sure everyone else is okay. Maybe you know someone like that.